Executioners who killed people daily for money drew the line at pirate punishments. These were professionals who tortured victims without blinking, yet they refused to carry out what pirates had invented. The part that changes everything? These weren't random acts of cruelty. Pirates designed them to serve one terrifying purpose, and it all starts with one of the oldest and bloodiest punishments pirates ever used. Pirates weren't exactly known for their mercy, but keel hauling took cruelty to a whole new level. Keel hauling punishment was so brutal that even the toughest sailors would rather face a hurricane than endure what came next. Here's how this nightmare worked. First, they'd tie a thick rope around the poor victim's body, making sure it was secure enough to drag a grown man through the water. Then came the really nasty part. They'd thread that rope under the entire ship's hull, from one side to the other. The victim would be thrown overboard and dragged underneath the massive wooden vessel. Now, you might think drowning would be the worst part of this ordeal, but pirates managed to turn drowning into the least of your worries. The bottom of every wooden ship was covered in barnacles, those sharp, crusty sea creatures that stuck to the hull like nature's own razor blades. As the victim got dragged across, these barnacles would scrape and tear at their flesh, shredding skin like a cheese grater made of pure evil. The salt water rushing into these fresh wounds created pain so intense that many victims would scream underwater, which only made them drown faster. It was like getting the world's worst full-body massage while someone tried to drown you at the same time. Dutch naval records from the 1600s show that keel hauling killed more than 60% of its victims. That's worse odds than a coin flip where both sides are deadly. The lucky ones died quickly from drowning or blood loss. The unlucky ones survived long enough to be hauled multiple times until their bodies finally gave up. Some executioners on pirate ships actually refused to handle the hauling ropes after witnessing the aftermath. These were men who had seen every kind of violence the sea could offer, yet they drew the line at keel hauling. Even pirates had standards, which should tell you something about how absolutely horrible this really was. But keel hauling wasn't the only way pirates found to make death as unpleasant as possible. While some pirates preferred the ocean for their torture methods, others discovered that the Caribbean sun could be just as deadly as any weapon. The sweatbox was a wooden crate barely big enough for a person to crouch inside, designed to slowly cook someone alive under the blazing tropical heat. Building one of these death traps was simpler than constructing a chicken coop, but infinitely more sinister. Pirates would create a small wooden box with no ventilation holes and little to no shade. The victim would be forced inside, usually in a crouched position with their knees pressed against their chest, then the lid would be nailed shut. The box would then be placed in direct sunlight on the ship's deck or a sandy beach. The Caribbean sun doesn't play games. Temperatures inside these boxes could reach over 130 degrees. Within the first hour, victims would start sweating heavily, losing precious body fluids they desperately needed to survive. It was like being trapped inside a wooden sauna that someone forgot to give an off switch. Dehydration set in quickly, followed by heat stroke. The victim's body temperature would rise dangerously high, causing confusion, hallucinations, and eventually organ failure. Their skin would blister from the intense heat, and insects would find their way through the wooden cracks to feast on the trapped person. The punishment typically lasted between 24 and 48 hours, though some captains would leave victims inside until they begged for death. Many went completely insane from the combination of heat, isolation, and physical agony. They'd lose control of their body functions, sitting in their own waste as they slowly cooked in the wooden prison. What made the sweatbox particularly cruel was that death wasn't guaranteed to be quick. Some victims would hang on for days, their bodies somehow clinging to life even as their minds completely shattered. Pirates would sometimes hear singing, crying, or mad laughter coming from inside the box as the heat drove people beyond the edge of sanity. The smell was another level of horror entirely. A human body slowly cooking in its own fluids creates an odor that would make rotting fish seem pleasant by comparison. It was like having a portable garbage dump that happened to contain your former crewmate. Some ship captains and their enforcers refused to put men in sweatboxes after witnessing the complete mental breakdowns that followed. They'd seen plenty of violence and death, but watching someone slowly lose their mind while their body fell apart was too much, even for seasoned pirates. However, pirates weren't finished exploring creative ways to make death a living nightmare. Pirates discovered that barrels, normally used for storing rum and supplies, could serve a much darker purpose. Barrel confinement combined the worst elements of suffocation, heat torture, and complete helplessness into one terrifying package. The setup was deceptively simple. Pirates would force a victim into a wooden barrel, either curled up tightly or standing upright depending on the container's size. Once the person was crammed inside, the top would be sealed shut with no way to escape. It was like playing hide and seek in the world's most uncomfortable hiding spot, except nobody was planning to find you. Unlike other forms of confinement, barrels left victims completely immobilized. The curved wooden walls pressed against their body from all sides, making it impossible to stretch, turn, or find any relief from the cramped position. Arms and legs would go numb within hours from the restricted blood flow. The heat buildup inside a sealed barrel was devastating. With no ventilation whatsoever, temperatures could reach deadly levels within hours. The victim's own body heat, combined with the tropical sun beating down on the wooden container, created an environment hot enough to cause severe dehydration and heat stroke. It was like being locked inside a wooden pressure cooker that someone left on high heat. Insects were drawn to the smell of human sweat and fear, finding their way through tiny cracks in the wood. Flies, ants, and even small rats would crawl inside to feast on the trapped victim who couldn't swat them away or defend themselves in any way. Pirates used barrel confinement as punishment for theft, disobedience, or disrespecting ship officers. The punishment would continue until the victim died from heat stroke, dehydration, or suffocation, which usually took anywhere from 12 hours to 3 days. One recorded case from the early 1700s described a sailor who survived 2 full days in a barrel before finally dying. When the pirates opened it up, the condition of the corpse was so shocking that several crew members immediately vomited. It was their way of giving troublemakers a really long time out that they'd never recover from. Some executioners refused to seal the barrel or check on the prisoner once the terrible smells began. Even pirates had their limits, and apparently the odor of a slowly dying human being was where many drew the line. Still, pirates had even more inventive ways to turn death into absolute terror. Pirates took the respectful naval tradition of burial at sea and twisted it into one of their most psychologically terrifying punishments. What started as a dignified way to lay sailors to rest became a method of execution that haunted crews long after witnessing it. When sailors died naturally at sea, their bodies would be sewn into sailcloth along with a cannonball to weigh them down. This created a proper burial shroud that would sink quickly to the ocean floor. It was the sea's version of a proper funeral, just with canvas instead of a wooden casket. Pirates decided to skip the part about waiting for someone to die naturally. They began stitching live prisoners into sailcloth as their chosen method of execution for traitors and deserters. The victim would be forced to lie still on a piece of heavy canvas while pirates began sewing them into what would become their floating tomb. The stitching process started at the victim's feet and worked slowly upward, creating a canvas cocoon around the still breathing person. Each stitch brought the sailcloth closer to their face while they remained fully conscious and aware of exactly what was happening. It was like being fitted for a suit that you'd wear for eternity, except the tailor had absolutely no interest in your comfort. The cannonball sewn into the bottom added weight and an extra dose of psychological terror. Victims could feel its heavy presence against their feet, serving as a constant reminder of their destination once they hit the water. Pirates would deliberately take their time with the stitching, both to maximize the mental torture and to give other crew members a clear view of what happened to those who betrayed the ship. Some would beg and plead until the moment the canvas covered their mouth, muffling their final desperate words. After completing the macabre sewing job, pirates would drag the canvas-wrapped body to the ship's edge and toss it overboard without ceremony. The victim would still be alive when they hit the water, trapped inside their sailcloth prison as the cannonball dragged them down toward the sea bottom. The most disturbing reports came from ships that heard sounds after the burial. Crews claimed they could hear muffled thuds or cries from underwater as the wrapped victim sank, still alive and struggling inside their canvas tombs. It was like dropping a very sad, very doomed present to the fish at the bottom of the ocean. Even this horrific punishment wasn't the most extreme method pirates used to eliminate their enemies. When pirates really wanted to send a message that would echo through maritime history, they would resort to the most spectacular and terrifying punishment in their collection: burning someone alive. This wasn't simply execution, it was a horror show designed to scar the minds of anyone who might consider betraying their captain. This ultimate punishment was reserved exclusively for the gravest offenses: mutiny, attempted murder of ship officers, or plotting to steal the vessel. The condemned person would be tied securely to the ship's main mast or a crossbeam, bound so tightly they couldn't move even an inch. It was like being invited to the world's worst barbecue where you were both the guest of honor and the main course. The preparation ritual was almost as frightening as the execution itself. Pirates would coat the victim from head to toe in thick, black pitch or tar, substances that burned long and hot once ignited. This sticky coating would cling to skin and clothing, ensuring the fire would spread evenly and burn for an extended period. The actual burning began at the victim's feet and slowly crept upward. This wasn't accidental. Pirates wanted the condemned person to remain conscious for as long as possible, both to maximize their suffering and to create maximum psychological impact on the watching crew. Death would eventually come from severe burns and smoke inhalation, but the process typically took several agonizing minutes. Every single crew member would be ordered to watch and strictly forbidden from looking away. Pirates wanted everyone to witness exactly what happened to people who crossed the ship's command structure. It was mandatory attendance at the most disturbing educational seminar ever conducted. The fire created serious dangers for the wooden ship itself. Flames could easily jump from the victim to the deck, rigging, or sails, potentially destroying the entire vessel along with everyone aboard. Some executions had to be stopped halfway through when the fire spread beyond control. Many officers and designated executioners were genuinely terrified of lighting the pitch-covered prisoner. Some executioners completely refused to light the fire after seeing earlier burnings. In these cases, captains would have to find alternative volunteers or threaten lower-ranking sailors with the same punishment if they refused to carry out the execution. The psychological damage extended far beyond the actual execution. The punishment was so effective at preventing mutiny that most pirate crews only needed to witness it once before the message was permanently burned into their minds. It was like having a permanent reminder that crossing the captain could turn you into the ship's most unwelcome campfire. These 5 punishments reveal the darkest depths of human cruelty at sea. Pirates perfected methods of torture that horrified even hardened criminals and executioners of their time, creating nightmares that survived in maritime history.